Welcome. It's good to see so much interest in tonight's topic, destroying the joint. But let's hope you don't just start just quite yet. The Wheeler Centre is a lovely venue. We don't really want to destroy it. And apparently we were just reading in The Australian, there's the epicentre of right-on debate. So they actually, I don't know if anyone came because they read about the event in The Australian, but they actually promoted it for us. So it's very generous. Could I ask everyone to turn off their mobile phones, or if they haven't done so already? Thanks. And I'd also just like to take a moment to acknowledge the ongoing struggle of Indigenous Australians and the fact that this building is, as all other buildings in Melbourne, built on Aboriginal land. So my name is Jacinda Woodhead. I'm the Deputy Editor at Overland Literary Journal. I assume that you're all familiar with Overland. Well, hopefully some of you are. It's a magazine of radical left culture and politics, and we've been publishing since 1954. We organised this event in conjunction with the Wheeler Centre about 48 hours ago, so it's amazing that we have such a turnout. In the wake of Julia Gillard's speech earlier this week, plus a bunch of other recent events that have made people ask a lot of questions about feminism and sexism in Australia today and what it means for them. I have some notes here. Did you want me to launch into the questions, or would you like me to give a bit of an introduction to the issue? Yeah, okay, great. Gender and feminism has been in the air the past few years and on the lips of the media the past few weeks. There were the global grassroots movement like SlutWalk and the international support for Pussy Riot, but now issues of sexism and gender are starting to go mainstream. Just this week, we saw our first female Prime Minister deliver a verbal smackdown, as one of our panellists called it, in Parliament to the Leader of the Opposition, Tony Abbott, a man not really known for his feminist politics. Interestingly, the national media largely downplayed her accusations of sexism and misogyny. Before this, there was a fallout from Alan Jones's long-running campaign against Gillard and the Margie Abbott interview in which she revealed that Abbott is allegedly a Downton Abbey viewer, which is supposed to make him suddenly endearing to women everywhere, I suppose. There was also recently the enormous response to the Jill Meagher tragedy, which had some of the look and feel of the Reclaiming the Night marches, which started in the late 70s as a response to the rape and sexual violence commonly committed against women. Then, of course, there's the fact that Labor has announced cuts to single parents' payments, which could see single parents, the majority of whom are women, being forced into untenable living and working situations as they face losing up to $140 a week in payments. The cold reality is we already live in a country where women are only paid 83 cents for every dollar that a man earns. They make up the majority of the casual workforce, and they're often never promoted. Women routinely perform twice as much unpaid household labour as men, even when they work full-time, and that's not counting for childcare or child raising or anything to do with children. In some parts of Australia, women are living under welfare quarantining and monitoring, and women are still raped and abused, and there are still places where women can't access abortion and other reproductive and health services in Australia. So I think there's a very real sense that something is still really out of gender balance in this country. But let's find out if our panel agrees. So we're really fortunate to have three very talented speakers here tonight. To save time, I'm going to introduce them all now. First, we have Karen Pickering. She's best known as one of the organisers of SlutWalk and Cherchez la Femme. My French is terrible, did I say that again?
Perfect.
It's Melbourne's monthly digest of current affairs and popular culture from a feminist perspective, and it often takes place in the pub. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Always.
On the end, we have Stephanie Convery. She's a writer, reviewer, blogger, and as of yesterday, she's a doctor. So congratulations on graduating, Stephanie.
Thanks.
And we also have with us journalist Jason Whittaker, who is also editor of Crikey, which I'm sure needs no further introduction. Thank you for coming, Jason. So I have some questions here. To kick things off, I thought I'd begin by asking you all, is there a new feminism happening? Karen, as a feminist organiser, what do you think? Are we seeing something new here? And if so, what do you think has spurred it?
Thank you for that question. It's a question that I get asked a lot, and depending on the day, you can either feel as though you're pushing the ocean back with a broom, and in fact, the feminist struggle is thwarted as it's ever been. And then other days you feel like there is a new energy, like there's a genuine shift in the energy of the public sphere. And certainly the work that I do and other feminist organisers and activists do relies on clocking that energy and harnessing it and really believing that it's there. So I think I'm wary of talking about new types of feminism or new waves of feminism or generational gaps in feminism, because I have so many associations with feminists of all ages and all walks of life, and so I feel as though it's sometimes a bit antagonistic, this idea that somehow young people have figured out how to do feminism better than older feminists.
Right.
But also, that antagonism goes both ways. Is there a new feminism? I think there's certainly a new feminist energy, and I think that there are new strategies to continue the feminist struggle. So I think that that what we're witnessing are the results of those new strategies and that new energy. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Stephanie, do you think this is a real feminist resurgence, and do you see it as a continuity of tradition from, say, the 70s and 80s, or do you think there's a break from tradition, or do you think, like Karen, that is?
This is a bit of I also find this a bit hard to analyse, in the sense that I don't think that it's necessarily something... Feminist movements have always been fragmented, and feminists have always had different ways of seeing their agenda and different goals. So to say that now is different to 10 years ago which part of the feminist movement is different to 10 years ago, and how? I think that there is an energy that is there, like Karen says. I really do. But how it's being pushed into the public sphere is another matter entirely. And I think that, if I had to characterise contemporary feminism in a word, I would say that I think it is it was disorganised. A little bit wavering. It needs to be grounded in something concrete. I think that's where it differs from perhaps the movements in the 70s and the 60s. But I don't necessarily think that that's something that can't change.
Okay. And Jason, what's the outlook from where you're standing? Do you think we need a new feminism, or do you think we still need feminism? Do you think feminism is still relevant?
The first thing I would say, obviously, is I have no idea what I'm talking about. In the words of my cartoonist, we have a guy called First Dog on the Moon who doodles in our edition each day, and he's a card-carrying feminist and lectures me about it regularly, and has sort of a motto that, it's his personal view that men shouldn't actually publicly talk about feminism, and I think there's probably something to that, because we'll probably get it wrong. So I don't think I'm here to talk about feminism, but I can talk more about, I guess, the context, particularly with what we've seen over the last week or so, particularly a rather large moment that we saw this week as well. In terms of a new feminism, as you say, it's a word with multiple definitions, and so it's almost impossible to plot on a map or suggest when an era starts or ends, or when a new era starts and ends. But there's probably some sort of landmark for it this week, in terms of politics. Susan Mitchell wrote a piece for us in Crikey after Julia Gillard gave her speech this week and said that the world had changed forever. I'm a little sceptical about that. I'm a little cynical about that. And I think that as the week progressed, things got kind of meaner, things got kind of bitchier, things got kind of uglier. I don't think we really resolved anything, and I think the problem that I personally had with the debate this week was that we were talking about rhetoric, as good as it was. which I think a lot of us wanted to divorce from the context of the week. The context was pretty important politically. It was pretty important to talk about the environment in which she said those words, some of the contrasts in some of her views, and I think it's important to put this stuff in context, and to say that it's changed the world is perhaps a little premature at the very least.
It does seem like early days.
I would have thought.
Well, let me ask you the question, or a similar question from a different angle. I mean, do you think there is a new kind of sexism or misogyny happening, most notably in the public sphere, that's giving rise to campaigns like Destroy the Joint? And I guess I'm thinking about Alan Jones here, and whether he, for example, is channeling the last gasp of an old conservative Australia, or are we seeing something new, which is more like Tea Party politics?
I'll buy it.
Okay.
Sorry, Karen, you about to? I think it's an old. I think sexism is as old as the hills, but I think that there's a particular kind of sexism that rears its head when it's faced with a certain amount of female agency, and this is what I think people like Alan Jones and Tony Abbott are participating in. I would not stand up and say that I think Julia Gillard is the world's greatest feminist. I don't, but she is a woman in power. And that kind of positioning is always going to bring a particular kind of nastiness, of sexism out of, particularly of men who feel threatened by that. And so what we're seeing is a very is that in public life.
Yeah, it's a kind of desperation,
yeah,
in a way. And with Alan Jones, you can certainly, you can almost taste the desperation and the need for relevance in a time when his behaviour and his views are becoming less and less acceptable. And so this is someone who prides himself on tapping into, the mainstream and ordinary Australians. And yet those same people, the mainstream and ordinary Australians, are rejecting him as vile and sexist. So I think it is a kind of, to go back to your question earlier about whether or not there's a new energy in feminism, I was thinking as Steph and Jason were answering, I wonder if it's not that it's also that feminism is going mainstream. So the more mainstream... Or
at least the language of feminism is going mainstream.
Yeah, and popular understanding of feminism is increasing. And so that I think has been a shift, and that is what makes it possible to have discussions like this in public, where 10 years ago we would not be even asked about sexism and misogyny in public life in Australia.
Yeah, I think it's certainly something that people are talking about a lot more. What do you think, Jason?
What do I think? Look, I think.
Sorry.
No, I would hope that it's dying rather than thriving in terms of sexism. I think that's true. I mean, when you sort of talk about the last vestiges of sort of male dominated. Look, I think that's true, and discrimination is kind of generational in a way, and social change is glacial, and it seems glacial to us over a lifetime, and that kind of seems inadequate. It always seems inadequate how slow it moves, but particularly over a life, particularly over the course of a government, over the course of a prime minister even, these things move slowly. And I think just in sort of reflecting on this as well, just had the thought that we're probably still struggling a little to deal with women in power. I think that it has changed the game, and I think that political operatives and media people like Alan Jones, who's a special case, obviously, I think they're struggling to deal with that. There was a really good anecdote I heard the other day that. And I'm coming back to the politics again, but an anecdote out of the coalition, out of the opposition, that apparently for a time, and perhaps still, coalition operatives were really nervous about sending male MPs out to attack the Prime Minister, and that the strategy was often to send a woman instead because they were worried about how that might look. We saw a lot of, Julie Bishop or Sophie Mirabella or Bronwyn Bishop, God forbid.
Or Christopher Pine or Bill Heffernan or any number of men who were attack dogs for Howard.
No, absolutely. But there was a thought in the coalition at the time that we can't be seen often in terms of the really aggressive pursuit of particular issues, particularly if they went to her personally or to her leadership, that perhaps a woman was better to do that than a man. And I just use that as an example of how they're sort of scrambling to deal with this, how they realise that the game has changed and how they're probably not very good at adapting to it, given the incredibly short history, unfortunately, that we have of women in leadership positions. I mean, incredibly short history, back to, we have the first female Prime Minister. We elected our first Premier in 1990, and we didn't even elect we didn't elect Anna Bligh because the others were installed as premiers. We didn't elect Anna Bligh until 3 years ago. There's a really short history on this stuff, and I think that people who play politics and play the game probably haven't adapted very well.
Okay, thanks. Well, that brings me to the next point, which is about how the media's role in relation to some of these events. So I'm thinking that I read a piece yesterday, I don't know if everybody else here read it, by the parliamentary sketch writer for the Sydney Morning Herald, Jacqueline Maley, and it was about how she thinks the Australian media got the Gillard speech wrong. And she said that the reason she thought the speech went viral internationally was because it was stripped of its context. The speech stood alone as a triumphant, long-awaited howl of indignation and fury against sexism and misogyny, which is why we saw it so popular on all these sites like Jezebel and throughout America and England and stuff. So, Steph, you wrote about Gillard's speech this week. Yours also went viral, maybe not in an international sense, but certainly nationally. So what are your thoughts on Gillard's speech?
Well, I think that part of the reason that the media response was so different, that the mainstream media response was so different to the perceived public response, was partly because the public actually watched it for a start. They were able to... how many of you actually every day go and watch Parliament in session? Nobody... Well, unless it's your job, you probably wouldn't. But a whole lot of people did see that. And they didn't see the context. They just saw this speech, which was quite powerful. And without having all of that other stuff, the context, it touched a lot of people. It clearly did. But I also think that mainstream political coverage in Australia is kind of its own echo chamber. And so what Canberra journalists saw and what the public saw when they watched that piece was very different. And that's where that discord comes from. And also it could be shared widely, and easily and quickly, and it was.
I guess I'm wondering what you think about Gillard's speech, though, or what you think the context was, and then I guess a separate question is if you think the media missed an opportunity to debate something broader. Yeah.
Well, I think the context was in defence of her government defending Peter Slipper's position, maintaining his position in Parliament, which, that's what they attacked Abbott for misogyny, because he said that they were being sexist by ignoring the Slipper text messages. I mean, I think that regardless of what all the details of that were, it's enough to know that this wasn't Julia Gillard coming out and saying, with no reason whatsoever, misogyny is awful, this man is a misogynist, you shouldn't vote for him, he's not fit to lead the country. I mean, she did say those things, but she said those things for a specific reason, and they had to do with, the government's position in public eye, their position within this, web of political backstabbings and stuff that goes on in Canberra. Like, there is a broader context, and it's very complicated, and I don't think we should just take these things as on their face value, because I think there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind there.
And what do you two think? Do you have anything to add?
No, well, I absolutely agree with that. And we wrote about this as well, this idea of there was absolutely a conflicting narrative in play this week. There was acclaim and jubilation and genuine feeling around Julia Gillard's rhetoric, and I saw that in my own social media feeds. I saw it in my office and my social circles. That was real and genuine and powerful and perhaps has some sort of lasting impact. As you say, at the same time, there was a political story, and that's what the press gallery was doing. It was following the political story. The press gallery, well, it's nonsense to talk about the press gallery as some sort of collective entity anyway. Is it an echo chamber? Probably, but again, that's a bit insulting to the individuals involved. I mean, they're all free-thinking people, and they covered the story the way they thought it should be covered. I didn't read a single article on the following day that didn't mention what Julia Gillard said and the really great stuff in her speech. I think it was reported fairly. It was certainly recorded, and I think the stories we read had the context. The context is important. The context was that they put a speaker in this position to try and shore up their government. They supported him despite knowing for really the whole time, because let me tell you, when you work in anything to do with politics, you've been hearing rumours about Peter Slipper for years now. Certainly for the last few months, they knew that these texts were coming out. They continued to support him.
The media often report stories out of context. I mean, they very rarely provide a context for a story.
Well, perhaps, but I think they did here. I mean, I think that.
Can I just jump in for a second? That the context, everyone keeps talking about this magical context. The context is actually not that complicated. The context is that it's a minority government that had to manoeuvre in a way that the rest of us are not super comfortable with in order to get this guy who's pretty clearly a creep to help them govern, right? So you've got the Liberal Party clearly want to get rid of Slipper because he's a turncoat, he's a liability to them. The Labor Party wanted to keep Slipper because he keeps their government functioning. Nobody likes Slipper. Nobody thinks he's a great guy. He's purely a political tool. So the fact is that both sides are manoeuvring... Political tool, lol. But that both sides are manoeuvring here, and that if you support one side, you're saying they're manoeuvring, and if you support the other side, you say they're manoeuvring. Yes, they're politicians. That's their job. The job of press gallery journalists is to report politics. You're right, absolutely. But they all reported exactly the same thing, which is that Julia Gillard's speech is not as important as Peter Slipper's text messages, which is false.
And they completely missed the fact that it had but it had a huge impact on the public. It was almost immediate, and they did completely miss that.
It's hit 1 million views as of this afternoon. 1 million views on YouTube, which is, I know we're all kind of inured to this now. We're like, oh, such and such got 1 million views, but that's in 48 hours. 1 million people have watched a dry political speech from Question Time in Australia. You know what I mean? Like, it clearly 1 million people going to watch that and watching the whole 15 minutes, and then at the end saying, I liked it when she said that bit. Mum, what does misogyny mean? What is this sexism? Like, this,
it means
matters.
People have a lot invested in it. I agree.
Yeah.
No, and I think that's absolutely right. That it was absolutely driven by social media, and it was an example of how we can actually set the agenda. I guess, therefore, I ask, well, why the outrage that the media didn't take the line that we thought? I mean, I dispute the idea that anyone made a judgment, really, about what was a more important issue. I think they were just making the point that there was more than one issue. That's what they do. That's what journalists are supposed to do.
You don't think Peter Harcher and Michelle Grattan made judgments?
I think...
Or Paul Sheehan made judgments?
I think they're political reporters, and they reported on politics. I think that's what they do, and I think they did not failed the job.
Okay, well, we might move on from the Julia Gillard speech because I have some other questions as well. So one of the things I was thinking about was, and this relates to the social media aspect as well, that 30,000 people marched a fortnight ago in the memory of Jill Meagher. And I'm wondering, Karen, if you see this as a feminist statement, or do you think it should be seen in some kind of broader context, or is it something else altogether?
Just taking a moment because I was sort of blathering away, and now I'm thinking about Jill Meagher. I was at the march, and it was an extraordinary moment and spontaneous action, I think. I think that it was deliberately, decoupled from explicit feminist action and a feminist context in order to not make a political, not make political mileage out of a terrible tragedy. I think that badging it as a peace march meant that the maximum number of people felt welcome and felt as though it was a small gesture they could make to condemn violence against women without a political context. And I get that a lot of people are uncomfortable with feminist activism when it isn't explicitly political, but I think in this case it was absolutely appropriate that people had a space to take up public space, for women and men to go out in public and declare that the city was more than what happened to Jill Meagher. Yeah, I think it was a feminist action in intent and in practice, but I think that it was, carefully avoided any feminist rhetoric, and I think that was the right call.
Do you have any opinions on this?
I do. I think that more than anything, that particular march was was a way for people to express their grief about that horrible thing that happened to Jill Meagher, and I think that was completely appropriate. I would hesitate to call it a feminist action, though. I really do believe that that feminism is about having goals and having things that you want to see changed and ways to change those things. I think it would have been completely inappropriate for them to hang an agenda on the public grief and on that particular instance, in the same way that you wouldn't go to somebody's funeral and say and make a political statement at it. But I do think there are political statements to be made about those issues, and I think it's really important that we are able to couple that feeling that we have that this is horrible and this needs to change to actual material changes in the world. Like, for example, I mean, the traditional things that crop up around assault and rape and murder of women is police power and things like that. And do we support more police on the streets, or don't we? Once you start getting to those questions, you actually start to get to the material differences that these things could make. And I think those are the things those are the places that energy needs to be channeled into if we're actually going to see changes of a feminist nature in the world.
Right. I mean, I think that's all really interesting. But equally, when the Reclaim the Night marches started in the late 70s, I mean, they were responses to gang rapes and pack rapes and the rapes and death of women across the world. I mean, it did spread without the social media, but in a way that was similar to the SlutWalk, phenomenon, I suppose.
The Jill Meagher Peace March, as it was called, I think is probably going to mint a few feminists, actually. And I think the idea of someone going out into the street to be visible, to take action, to get on your feet, to stand with other people, to stand behind a message is something that not that many people are familiar with. So for them to do it and unite in their grief and unite in their condemnation of what happened if even some of them go and think about the structural violence against women, if some of them think about the fact that despite being illegal, these things continue to happen to women in epidemic numbers, I think people are going to reject things like more surveillance or more police presence. You know, I think they're going to, I hope that a lot of people are going to start having conversations that lead them to cultural change and lead them to ask for better societies rather than ask for better police forces, you know, or better CCTV cameras or whatever, you know. I
do think one of the most important things that came out of that was that people actually felt like they could get together with their community and feel something in common. Like, I mean, I don't actually think that. I think people often these days feel really atomised, and I think that's part of the reason that the feminist movement has been struggling for the last 20 years, is that people feel atomised from each other. They don't feel like their community is cohesive. They don't necessarily feel like they have that much in common with the person that lives next door or anything. And without, you know, being cliched or anything, the fact that 30,000 people can get together in a street and feel something together, like that's really important, particularly for social movements and particularly for political movements. I guess I would just hope that we can start to have those conversations about what is next. And yes, it probably means we'll fight about it because we don't all agree on the best way to change society, you know. But if we start actually talking about those things, we take that sense of community and those energies and push them into, you know, how do we actually change things? Then I think that we'll start to get more traction.
Well, earlier this week, I know, Steph, in the post you wrote, you actually made a call to arms, and you said that you thought people should campaign to reverse these welfare cuts or even increase, you know, the payments to single parents. And can you see a campaign? Can you realistically see a campaign there?
Yeah, well, I think there are movements, like grassroots movements, doing it. I can't remember the name of them. Eva Cox wrote an article on New Matilda talking about that exact thing and about the organisations that were trying to work to reverse this decision. And it turns out that actually the government ignored their own human rights recommendation panel, the first recommendation that they'd ever given or something. They just completely ignored it. They said you shouldn't put these things through, and they did. I mean, look, I think social welfare is one of those, it's not sexy, you know. Welfare payments are not sexy, but I reckon anybody who's been a single parent knows how hard it is, and that these are the sorts of things that we should be doing to support women. And that.
Well, Jason, what do you think? Do you think this is an issue that you could build a campaign around, like the one that was built around the Jill Meagher thing, using social media and these other platforms? Do you think that it's possible to do something?
Yeah, it's probably ripe for a campaign. Trickier because it's not about lobbying one side of politics or the other. You've got to do both. One of the other things that maybe got lost through the week is that the coalition voted with Labor in terms of cutting welfare to single mothers, single parents. Obviously, most of them are mothers. So this is a bipartisan position. It's incredibly difficult to get any sort of traction politically, and that's not the only traction, of course, but it was the politicians who made the decision and the politicians who have to reverse it. Incredibly difficult to change minds when parties know they will not come under political pressure, and that's the situation that we're in with that issue.
But what if 30,000 people turned up to their office?
Well, that would be quite something.
Well, it would be, but I mean, I'm just saying it's not unprecedented now. I mean, it was a different situation, but...
No, absolutely, and as I say, I think it's absolutely ripe for a campaign, and I think it's a real chink in the government's armour, particularly. Labor are supposedly the party for families, are supposedly the party of social welfare and fighting disadvantage. I think this exposed Julia Gillard and the government a little in that it conflicted with that message and conflicted with some of the things that Julia Gillard was talking about this week. So I think that's a problem for her. All I'm suggesting is that there is no political heat now, and it would have to be some pretty incredible campaign to create some.
I was going to say, I think that we all know that Julia Gillard, as Prime Minister of a Labor government, has passed policy and pushed through policy and refused other policy change that has been terrible for women. I think Julia Gillard has done some things to Australian women that we should definitely be asking hard questions about, including on the day that she makes this landmark speech, passing laws that would cut payments to single parents, disproportionately affecting women. So I hope that the energy and the give a fuck that is generated by watching a speech like this is channeled into people asking for concrete change. As Steph is saying, it's not always my job, like as an organiser, people often say to me, but what is the list of demands for the kind of work that you do? It's not usually part of
I say that to you.
Steph said that to me, so did Jacinda. These two ganged up on me. And the idea that you can bring about change without the talk can cure, without the cultural change, I think is crazy. So the cultural change is something that's possible because of the inspiration and the energy and excitement around this speech. So therefore, I really very much do hope that it gets channeled into serious, concrete change and material pushes against the government. I want people to campaign against Julia Gillard for the intervention. I want people to campaign against Julia Gillard because she won't grant marriage equality. I want people to campaign against Julia Gillard for lots of things. And this speech allows us leverage. It allows us to say, you have now become important to us as feminists. You have stood up to the biggest misogynist bully in this country, thus inspiring us and empowering us to feel like we can do that in our workplaces and our homes. So therefore, walk the talk, Julia Gillard. Don't hurt Aboriginal women. Don't hurt women on welfare. Don't hurt women who want to get married to their female partners, Like, this is an opportunity for us to hold the government to account.
But it's also, like, that introducing that language into, she never used, I don't think she used the word feminist once.
No, she didn't. She doesn't.
She used the word misogyny, yeah.
Misogynist and sexist, yeah.
When that to take such a prominent position in Parliament and therefore, in our public discussions, I think is really important. I think we have to, I think that like you say, gives us an opportunity, but to turn what they would have us think into our own agenda.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, that leads me on to campaigns more broadly. So, Karen, what do you think the next steps for a feminist movement are? And does SlutWalk have a position on this?
Well, sorry, what was that? I didn't understand them.
Just what should be the next steps for
I was thinking about the speech.
Movement. That's okay. Sorry. Next steps, feminist movement. And then I'm wondering, like, does SlutWalk or any other groups that you're involved in, do they have a position on this, or does it come up often? And because you must think about growing. Yeah, we do. And for instance, in SlutWalk HQ this year, we talked a lot about how SlutWalk could bring about more concrete change, and partly as a result of the excellent article that Stephanie and Jacinda wrote criticising the SlutWalk movement, because feminism does have to engage with constructive criticism and has to, and we certainly did in organising meetings. We said, it is an important thing that you have this show of strength on the streets, that you have thousands of people gathering together to say, no to sexual violence against women. But we thought that SlutWalk could do a lot more. So we spoke to, different kind of stakeholders in the community about how we could hook them up with each other. So getting rape crisis centres, talking to schools, getting people at legal aid, talking to, health professionals. So trying to be a point of contact for different groups that were on the front lines of sexual violence against women. Every feminist action has to start somewhere, and then it will grow and mature, and hopefully its tentacles will go out and take hold. So, Reclaim the Night has clearly been given a new urgency and a new context in the wake of the Jill Meagher murder. Reclaim the Night has been
described as in opposition to SlutWalk a number of times, but the Reclaim the Night organisers have asked me to speak at the Reclaim the Night march, and they, like the SlutWalk movement, feel as though the events are complementary, and the more feminist action on the streets, the better. So I think feminist energy, like all activist energy, will go where it wants to go, and things can happen that you don't expect that will catalyse them. So like the Julia Gillard speech, the Alan Jones saying that we're destroying the joint, the horrific case of Jill Meagher, all these things have coalesced at a particular time, and I think really energised and catalysed and galvanised feminists.
Steph, you've written that the movement needs to set some goals, or feminism more broadly, and so I'm wondering if you could talk about what you think some of those goals are. This is the last question.
Well, I guess I wouldn't go out of my way to make everybody else think what I think. I think we should have a huge discussion about it. But I think it should be in concrete terms. Some of the things that I was trying to think of, like off the top of my head, gender education in schools from primary school up. That's something that I think would be really beneficial to the community as a whole. I think social services. I think free abortion on demand. I think free childcare would be something that would dramatically change the lives of enormous numbers of women. I don't think it's a good idea to think... there were some comments floating around this week about how politics is all about compromise. And I think that's a really defeatist attitude. I think we should actually be aiming really high. I think we should be demanding things that look actually beyond what we could possibly achieve, because you don't argue, you don't fight for compromise, you fight for what's right. And the things that are wrong in the world at the moment with regards to the way society treats women, I don't want to compromise on that. I don't want to compromise on women's rights. I think that we should be fighting for the absolute, and we should be saying what that looks like, and we should be saying it now.
And Jason, I'm just wondering what you think the responsibility is here of the media, because I guess when I made that remark earlier about a lot of stories being kind of contextless, and I think that the media likes one-off events rather than sustained campaigns. Like I think it can be hard to follow. I think that you actually mentioned this about SlutWalk earlier this year, Karen. I know we have to wrap up now, but I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts about the media's responsibility here.
I think the media's responsibility is just to know what its readers care about. It doesn't have an obligation to run certain issues or certain causes, but it is death to not know what your audience cares about. That's as sort of a digital media thing as much as anything else. But if there is a new feminism, if there is a new movement here, if there is a new wave, then responsible media and media that cares about being in business will follow it and cover it and find out why it's important to its readers is about all I can say.
Okay. Well, thank you. I think that we'll open it up to the floor for some questions, if there are any questions. I think I see some questions.
Hi. Jason, when you were talking about the response to the Gillard speech, you used the word bitchier. Have you ever thought about removing gendered insults from your vocabulary, especially on a feminist panel?
It's an unexpected question.
I feel like you've been bursting to say that for quite some time.
Does it really need an answer? Was it a genuine question?
I guess all I would say is that should we be more mindful? Should I be more mindful? Absolutely. Yes, we should.
It's very gracious. Are there any more questions?
I've got a question. The whole affair kind of cut through the discourse like lightning. I think what Gillard did was absolutely fantastic. However, I think, as you pointed out, there is a problem here, and I think that problem probably stems back right back to the beginning of the second wave of feminism in the late 60s, in a sense that quite a lot of feminists accepted capitalism as it is and made very good careers within it. And I think, what we have to do is see the feminist struggle in the context of larger struggles, and patriarchy, of course, is part of the problem. But as I think a lot of people pointed out on their panel, single mothers, Gillard didn't have any hesitation about passing this fairly repressive legislation, which will cause a lot of difficulties for single mothers. And perhaps, the commentariat, the Murdoch commentariat and the Fairfax commentariat tried to suppress it, but the social media, of course, overcame it. But, it's a great development, I think, in Australian politics.
Thank you. Were there any other questions?
Yes, hi. Jason, I've got a question for you about the media because I don't think you answered the last question particularly well. I was just thinking what you thought. I mean, my response to that would have been that the media is actually an ideology and it produces a particular ideology about what its particular view is rather than producing something for the viewers. It produces something it wants the viewers to see and we buy into that. And of course with independent journalism that's a little bit of a different story, but say Channel 9, Channel 10, Channel 7, they've got an ideology, they've got something that they want viewers to see and they want them to buy into that particular discourse. So I was wondering if you could perhaps reflect on that a little bit.
So you're asking about mainstream corporate journalism as opposed to independent journalism, or do you mean journalists in general and objectivity?
Media in general as an ideology, yeah.
Okay. It's a tough one.
As an ideology, media is biased. Journalism is biased. Journalists are biased. Journalists are human beings, so they are not impartial. The idea of anyone being entirely impartial is ridiculous, and media is run by human beings who make subjective judgments. The job of a good journalist, certainly what I was taught, was to try really, really hard to keep your views out of it. Does particular media companies pursue agendas? They absolutely do, and you know what? They always have. This is not a new phenomenon. In fact, newspapers are less opinionated than they were 50 years ago, for example. We're not dealing with new issues in terms of the power of the media or the influence or the people influencing what you see and read. The really cool development is that it matters less because you don't actually need the media anymore. This is the beauty of where we're at. This is digital media. This is social media. You don't need the media.
Or you can be the media.
Or be the media. And do something with the outrage. I mean, if you are unhappy with a particular source of media, then, well, don't read it, obviously, but, start your own campaigns. Get people interested in what you're interested in. The role of mainstream media is lessened, and that is a good thing for social movement.
Thanks, Jason.
Can I say something to that question? That I think you're absolutely right. I think that but the reality is that we kind of all know which media outlets have the ideology that we like. So we read... Yeah, that's right. No, that's right. With media literacy, you're right. And media literacy could probably get added to sex ed and gender ed as things that should be taught to children.
Or taught more.
Yeah, but it's... So what the new media landscape means is that we can largely avoid opinions that we don't like and ideologies that we don't like, and we can largely just sort of immerse ourselves in ones that we do like. I do that. But what it means for movements, say, like SlutWalk and other kind of feminist actions, is that when the media doesn't care about what you care about, you just forget about the media. You just go around it. You become the media. You create media. You circumvent the media. You just completely, just act as though it's not there.
But
that's something you can do now.
There is a problem there, though, because the media, like the mainstream media, is huge corporations control it, and they have huge influence on things like government. So in some ways, you know, it's also a battle to get them to either, well, take on your cause, which I doubt would happen, or lose credibility with regards to it. You know, I think a lot of in a lot of cases, you know, social movements are actually fighting those corporations in terms of, you know.
Yeah. So some more questions. Sure. Oh, wait, is there? There's a couple up the front here as well.
Cool. Thank you. I guess I don't want to linger on the private thoughts of someone who you've quite rightly described as a creep that much, but I've seen a bit of talk on Twitter in the past few days about the content of Peter Slipper's messages. I'm just kind of interested in whether the members of the panel thought that the what he actually said was... I mean, I'm not questioning whether it was disgusting, but I'm questioning as to whether it is explicitly sexist or offensive.
I just liked Eva Cox, who was in the Australian Financial Review, and I'm paraphrasing obviously, but she said something like the text messages were much less about sexism and much more about highlighting the fact he's a dickhead, to use her term.
I feel sorry for him. I really do. I feel sorry for him. I think he's clearly, you know, a really weird dude who's really desperate for some... It's a serious thing that he sexually harassed someone, and he absolutely should face consequences for that. But did I find the content of the text messages offensive? No. I found them really sad and pathetic. It was like a 15-year-old boy, you know. Is that scary that he's the Speaker of the House at the time he sends them? Yes, absolutely. And has that kind of responsibility. But no, I don't. I found the language used just puerile, and you know, I'd want to also add that I would not like my personal text messages to be rifled through by a bunch of people to pull out the worst things I've said and then have that to pass for a judgment on my character. I think, you know, I think we've got lots of evidence that Peter Slipper's a creep, but I'm saying that those particular text messages, I think it's a non-story. I think it's, yeah.
Do you have anything to add?
I thought that was sexist. I thought they represented somebody who didn't think highly of women, and I thought that he was demeaning them. I mean, look, they made me feel kind of sick, to be quite honest. I'm not saying I have never heard anybody talk about, you know, women's bodies like that. I have, and you know, it doesn't always have to be sexist, but I think in this case it was.
Any other questions? There's a couple up the front as well, but okay.
Mine's just a general question. I'm wondering if you believe there's any danger in this becoming an argument between men and women when feminism, does feminism necessarily belong to women, or, yeah.
Sure. That's a good question. I mean, I was going to ask that before, Jason, when you said that you weren't able to comment on the feminism. I wondered if anybody else had any ideas about that on the panel. Do you think it's a movement that embraces men? Do you think they have a place for it, a space?
My feminism embraces men, and that has put me at odds with other feminists at times, but my feminism is absolutely engaged with men and inviting men to be a part of the change that we need to see. I think that the way society is at the moment here and in the rest of the world is shit for everyone. It's absolutely horrific for men also, that they're locked into these these limiting roles and these the expectations of them are so low. I think that men have a stake in feminism too, and certainly the feminist events that I hold are really well attended by men.
There was a bit of debate about when Margie Abbott came out and said that Tony was a feminist, and
everyone went, no.
Everyone's like,
and everyone said, well, that's crazy. That's crazy. Tony Abbott can't be a feminist. Well, you know what? Maybe Tony Abbott actually thinks he's a feminist. And Why not? I mean, surely feminism is something that you own. It's you know.
Do you want me to tell you why not?
I can also tell you why not.
I can tell you why Tony Abbott's not a feminist.
Can I make one more point though before you do?
I won't, because everyone knows.
And I'm referring to my own publication, but we had a really nice piece from Jane Caro, or is it Caro? I never know. I think it's Caro. And she made the point, and I thought this was really good, that here's a conservative leader in Australian politics who says, allegedly, we only have it from his wife, but who says allegedly that he's a feminist. That's kind of really cool, was her point. Because at least we're talking about it.
Yeah, it was a great point actually she made, that to take us full circle back to your first question, it was indicative of a new era in Australian politics if politicians were fighting to be seen as more feminist than one another. And I think Jane Caro was maybe overstating it a little bit, but yeah, it was a great point. I thought it was a good piece. Yeah.
I actually think that this is another indication of the fact that the title of a feminist has been so utterly divorced from action and change that a conservative, ultra conservative man can call himself a feminist, and some people say that that's okay. Because to me, Tony Abbott saying I'm a feminist and, you know, Germaine Greer saying I'm a feminist, the things that those two people stand for are completely different. And to me, I mean, you know, he can give him the word. Like, he can call himself a feminist all he likes, but he's not. He doesn't stand up for women's rights. He doesn't care about them, you know. And I think it's important that we look at what people actually stand for rather than just the title that they use to describe themselves.
And also, two of the fundamental tenets of feminism are economic independence and the right to control your own body. So it seems to me that Tony Abbott definitely
on both counts, he's actively spent most of his life fighting those two things, as well as personally terrorising women. And I think that can't be overstated, that not just punching the wall next to the head of a woman, but other events that are not discussed as often.
Maybe we won't go in there, but I read the David Myra essay too. Have you read it?
I think that his policies, his personal actions and his speech are all hateful to women. Can
I just say one more thing in response to that specific question? I think if we're worried about fighting with men about women's rights, then that's a bad way to think about it. I think we're going to have to fight with men and other women and, you know, people that you know, your brothers and your sisters and your mum and your dad. I mean, I don't know how many arguments I've had with this stuff about with my family. Like, but that's the kind of thing that's going to have to happen.
It will cost something. Yeah, it will cost something.
I think we have another question down here. If we've got time for one more. This man has been waiting for ages.
Very patient.
We've got to take exception to the position that the media was just doing its job. I think if that's what it thinks its job, it should get sacked. Because every time we have a chance to have a definitive discussion about a significant issue, this week it was sexism and feminism and how to address that. Within 2 days we're back to were these emails actually sexist, or should a Wayne Swan moved out of the CMFEU meeting, etc. So it was swamped by the main media. The critical issue was swamped, and that's happened over and over again in the life of this government. Major issues like climate change get swamped in personality politics. So it's either at best it's these people not actually understanding what the population wants. At worst, it's explicitly trying to manipulate the public and stop actual change occurring.
Yeah, that's true.
Do we have time for one more question? Great.
Hi, this is really more a comment than a question, but I just felt that we couldn't have this conversation tonight without just making mention of the 14-year-old girl who was shot by the Taliban. I just felt that had to be said, and that, you know, in the course of 2 weeks, to have these 3 extraordinary events in the media, one being Julia Gillard's speech, which I did watch out of context and found pretty compelling. As a playwright, I thought, you know, I couldn't write that speech any better. And then, secondly, you know, the Jill Meagher March, which was this extraordinary community outpouring of feeling, very pertinent to women's issues. And then thirdly, this 14-year-old girl shot for wanting to have a world in which she could have an education. And I thought of my 7-year-old daughter, who's, you know, pretty savvy, seeing these 3 events in the course of 2 weeks, and I thought, well, she's going to grow up, hopefully, in a very different world if we see this kind of outpouring of rage on these issues. So maybe, you know, something will come of it.
Cool. I mean, I don't know really what to say to that. I mean, it's a horrible thing that happened. You know, we're just into the 12th year of war in Afghanistan. You know, and I just think that horrible atrocities have happened there every single day over that time, and that's the comment I have to make about that.
Well, and also that the shooting of Malala has been something that, as you say, has captured the imagination, which is sort of an obnoxious saying that we use for the mainstream media, but that it's a great story, you know. So it has been picked up in that way, in a way that others...
A great story after a country at war.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, that other stories are not picked up, that every other day these atrocities happen and they're not picked up. But I think the problem with... Sometimes with... I've heard people say this week, you know, how petty and ridiculous that in Australia we're calling Tony Abbott a misogynist, you know, when this wee girl was shot in Pakistan. That's real misogyny, you know, what are feminists here complaining about? And I think that you know, my answer to that is always a variation on the theme of they are the same structures. They are the same structures all over the world, and we're incredibly privileged to live in the first world where those structures bear down on us in different ways and are expressed in different ways on men and women and limit our opportunities and limit our potential, but that everywhere in the world women are suffering and struggling under exactly the same structures and exactly the same regimes. And so I think that if anyone tries to tell you that, you know, that taking part in feminist action in Australia is you know, a terrible thing to do because women are starving in Africa, first ask them what they're doing about the women starving in Africa, and then say to them, I'm working against the same structures. You know, I think that if there's any advice I can give people who are going to take all this energy that brought you here tonight and that you're going to go back out into the world and channel it in some way and start campaigns and pitch to Crikey and pitch to all of the other media outlets about starting campaigns to get single parent payments reinstated, to get the intervention stopped, whatever it is. Just don't be derailed. Don't be derailed. Do what you know is the right thing to do. It's like Steph said, you know, aim for what's the right thing to do. Don't listen to the haters.
Thanks, Karen. I think we're over time, so thank you.
I really wanted to say that.
Alice.
Thank you to Jacinda.